Noah Gragson could be headed to Richard Childress Racing in 2025. Kyle Busch will not be returning to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025 despite rumors, and charter negotiations are not going very well. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. First, going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Sam Mayer's 2024 PCI scheme that we'll see at the Chicago Street Course. Scheme looks all right in my opinion. Really cool to see that Sam Mayer does have another new sponsor. He's been picking up a lot of new sponsors for 2024. I think it looks solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Chicago. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Briscoe's 2024 Mahindra Patriotic scheme that we'll see this weekend at Iowa. Looks really good in my opinion, like the colors of it overall, and glad to see there's a new Patriotic scheme for Mahindra this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ross Chastain's 2024 Busch for the Farmer scheme that we'll see this weekend at Iowa, which has a corned look. I think this looks really great in my opinion. I've been a big fan of the Busch Light schemes. This one's no exception. Kyle Busch knocked it out of the park. It looks amazing. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Iowa. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Corey LaJoie's 2024 Hawkeye Game Bridge scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Iowa. Obviously, with this being a home of the Iowa Hawkeyes, not a shock or surprise. I think this looks absolutely amazing. I think did an excellent job on this paint scheme. I imagine Caitlin Clark could show up to the track at Iowa. We'll have to wait and see. I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Iowa Speedway. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Dye's 2024 Rusty Walsh Tribute scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Iowa. I like this a lot. I love the colors of it. It kind of looks like that legendary number 2 scheme that Rusty Walsh ran for many years. I think it looks absolutely excellent, looks amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Iowa. I think it looks absolutely awesome. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Matthew Judon. As it was announced yesterday, Matthew Judon will be driving the pace car for the Cup Series race at New Hampshire. Matthew Judon currently plays for the New England Patriots. I think he's the linebacker for the team, if I'm not mistaken, and he'll be driving the pace car this weekend. It's a really big pickup. We've been seeing a lot of NFL stars and motorsport stars and other people coming from different other leagues, coming into previously supporting NASCAR and trying to grow the sport. I think it's really cool that Matthew Judon will get the chance and opportunity to drive the pace car this weekend at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Buddy Guy. As it was announced yesterday that Buddy Guy will be performing at the Chicago Street Course. Buddy Guy is one of the legends of the blues scene, played a lot of great songs, and one of the legends, and also part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. It's really cool to see you get the chance and opportunity to perform at the Chicago Street Course. I think Lauren Elaine is there this year as well. I think a couple of their big names are part of it this year. I believe also the Chainsmokers are back this year. So it's really exciting and great to see that Buddy Guy will be able to join an elite level of people who will be at this year's Chicago Street Course event. Really exciting stuff, and once again, glad to see that the Chicago Street Course, not Chicago Street Course, but Buddy Guy will be at the Chicago Street Course this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley of Racing America and TobyChristie.com that Kyle Larson has won his 20th race for Hendrick Motorsports in his 123rd start. That is the quickest for a driver in Hendrick's history to reach this milestone. Jeff Gordon reaches, I believe, his 125th start, and Jimmy Johnson, I believe, reaches in his 150th to 155th start. This is absolutely incredible. Now, granted, when Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson got there, they weren't as established of drivers as Kyle Larson was. But it shows that Kyle Larson and Cliff Daniels are doing an exceptional and great job working together. And you think about success that those two have had. Kyle Larson has gone from a driver who had a lot of wins at Chip Ganassi, 6 of those, to now having 26 career wins and being almost inside the top 30 on the all-time wins list. This is an amazing accomplishment for Kyle Larson. Congratulations to him on being the quickest to reach 20 wins. He's only the 3rd driver in Hendrick's history to have 20. Chase Elliott is very close to reaching that number. His next win, he'll become the 4th driver to reach that, but it'll be a lot longer than what Kyle Larson has accomplished at Hendrick in just a short amount of time. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hy-Vee. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday, or Monday, that Anna Stromer says they always wanted a cup race at Iowa. That's been one of the cooler things about our IndyCar sponsorship is that it opened the door to get a huge event there. Geez, she's throwing IndyCar under the bus. Obviously, IndyCar has had a lot of big people that have come out to the event. We know that we've seen people like Kenny Chesney, Ed Sheeran. I think this year Post Malone's going to be there. Last year, I think Carrie Underwood was there. But to basically say that NASCAR is a bigger event, which I think NASCAR to a higher degree is a bigger event than IndyCar. There's no disrespect to IndyCar, but IndyCar is not as big right now as NASCAR is. So I do think IndyCar will have a much better racing product at Iowa Speedway than the Cup Series is, because their short track program generally is not really great at the moment, to be honest. I think that it's kind of interesting she threw IndyCar under the bus. Obviously, IndyCar is having a lot of turmoil currently at the moment with certain comments being thrown, among other things. There's a lot of drama going on behind the scenes, and it's just a lot of things going on. And I think that NASCAR, while we're going to talk about charter negotiations not going very well at the moment, I think there's at least some positive things going on with NASCAR in a sense that I think is really going to help it grow. It's very interesting to look at. A lot of stars like Chase Elliott, Bubba Wallace, Kyle Larson, Kyle Busch all being out there will also help grow the sport in a big way. And you'll have some really great stars for the Xfinity Series race as well. It's really interesting to see, and it's kind of funny that she's kind of throwing IndyCar in the bus, which some of the things that she said are kind of true, unfortunately, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NBM Motorsports. As the NBM Motorsports unfortunately has confirmed, they have withdrawn from this weekend's Cup Series race at Iowa Speedway. The reason they've sadly withdrawn is because of the fact that sponsorship did not commit. They originally were going to run this weekend at Iowa Speedway, but sponsorship is the big key reason. It's such a shame, right? Because I really want to see NBM Motorsports run the whole entire season, but if you don't have sponsorship to run the whole entire year, sometimes things like this are unfortunately going to happen. And it sucks, like I said, because I want to see NBM Motorsports on the racetrack. Now, their next scheduled race is Nashville in a couple weeks. They won't be running next weekend in New Hampshire, but they will be back for a couple weeks from now at Nashville Super Speedway. Nonetheless, it's a shame to see that they will not be running next week, this weekend, but they will be back in a couple weeks at Nashville Super Speedway. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Chicago Street Course. As it was officially confirmed that construction has officially begun for the Chicago Street Course next month. Chicago Street Course, I believe, is supposed to take place on July 5th or 6th, if I'm not mistaken, which is about a month or two from now, and they're finally beginning construction. There's certain areas of the city are going to be unfortunately blocked off due to this, and it's going to be hard for traffic to get through. Obviously, hit pieces are already beginning once again for the second year of the Chicago Street Course. They do have a 3-year deal with the city, but there's been rumor speculation it may not even come back next year, though I do expect that they're going to at least go through a 3-year deal, but they do have Chicagoland that is ready to go behind the scenes just in case if they need a backup plan. I am excited for this year's race, don't get me wrong, but I'm also not expecting this race to be as good as last year's event. A big reason why the race was so good last year for its standards is because of the fact you had rain that came into the area, which I think helped make the race a lot better than it initially was. I think it was a fun race, do not get me wrong, but at the same token and same time, I just don't think the race will be as good because the next-gen car has not raced exceptionally well on road courses. Even though I do think the race at Sonoma was solid, I think that if they can make the racing better, it'd be great, and they still have to work on the next-gen car. But like I said, Chicago Street Course construction has officially begun, and it's going smoothly, hopefully. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the next-gen car. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night that Roland Day, who works for Supercars, was there, and he says that the next-gen cars are way too noisy, and they need to drop the decibels just a little bit. Now, I saw a lot of comments from a lot of people when this post came out basically saying that Roland Day does not know what he's talking about and they don't agree with him. Now, I'm going to say this. I have been to a couple NASCAR Cup Series races over the course of the last few years. I went in 2022 to Gateway, and I went to Gateway this year. I can admit that the next-gen cars are extremely loud. Now, they tell you when you go to these races, you need ear protection. Because like I mentioned and said, these cars are very loud and they're extremely loud. And like I say, they warn you to wear ear protection. I would not mind them, I would not mind them dropping the decibels just a little bit. I don't want to see them dropping like 30 or 40 decibels, but maybe down a reduction of like 5 to 10% would not be a bad move on their end. I think we all want our hearing, right? We don't want to basically have hearing that is really, really bad going forward. Again, I don't want to see them extremely dropped, but I get it because I think supercars have 90, 95 decibels, and you can basically hear. It's very hard to have conversations with people when you're at a race. Granted, it's normal. And when I hear interviews and stuff from drivers over the last couple of years, these cars have gotten loud. The Xfinity cars are not this loud. So maybe they could drop it down to the Xfinity Series levels. I don't think that would be a bad decision. But personally, I think maybe reducing it just a little bit also would not be a bad move. Some are going to disagree with me, and that's fine, and that's understandable. But I would not mind the cars being dropped on decibels just a little bit, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chandler Smith versus Jeremy Clements. Now, if you were on Twitter on Monday, you saw the feud that takes place. This came from a post that Steven Sun from Front Stretch posted, where basically showed that SVG did not get passed at all during the whole entire race. But Chandler Smith quote-tweeted Steven Sun's tweet by basically saying, shout out to those 51 green flag passes though. Jeremy Clements then commented with a sarcastic clap, yeah, good job, man. 4 of those came from taking me out. Chandler Smith then commented back saying, I didn't spin you out, that was somebody else. Then Jeremy Clements basically said, yeah, you sent a bunch of people into me. And then Chandler Smith sent more of his data, even showed S&T data, showing that maybe there was a little contact, but Jeremy was already stopped going into turn number 3 or turn number 11, I should say. And then you had Jeremy continue going back and forth with Chandler Smith, with eventually video evidence and photo evidence coming out showing that Chandler was making a very aggressive move, but basically it's nothing new on road courses, especially in the Xfinity Series. It was very difficult to pass during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Sonoma Raceway because of the repave that took place. While it was a little easier in the Cup Series race, it seemed like it was very difficult to pass in Xfinity. And all drivers were having a very difficult time to pass. So you saw a lot of contact near the end. We saw the feud between Parker Retzlaff and, of course, Ryan Sieg, which is very interesting considering Parker Retzlaff drew for Ryan Sieg back in the day. It was very interesting to see that these two were getting into a feud. But I like this conversation happening where you have a driver like Chandler Smith who's standing up for himself and feels like he didn't really do anything wrong, while you have Jeremy Clements who feels like he was done dirty by Chandler Smith. I don't think this will go into multiple weeks going forward, but at same time, I like seeing conversations like this where drivers can hash out their beef. It was a little awkward, definitely for sure, but also same time, like I mentioned, I have no problem with these drivers trying to squash the beef just a little bit. It's a very interesting move to look at, and personally, I think it's good for both these guys to have a conversation about what happened overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen, of course, picked up his second straight NASCAR Xfinity Series win this past weekend at Sonoma Raceway, and now talks and conversations are beginning that he could move up to the Cup Series full-time in 2025. But Bob Poggers posted a video yesterday talking about his celebrations and spoke on the multiple celebrations he has. One of those talking about the drifting around the racetrack completely with taunting Austin Hill, where Austin Hill gave the middle finger, and also talked about the rugby ball. Well, Shane basically said that Ross, of course, smashes watermelons every time he goes to victory lane, and when Daniel Suarez ends up winning a race, he smashes a piñata. Shane wanted to bring his own flair to victory lane. They actually told him, Justin Marks told him, that he needed to bring his own flair to victory lane. Well, his own flair is kicking a rugby ball into the stands. Now, he said that the air was not filled up completely, which is why the rugby ball was not able to get up into the stands. I personally love the celebration that Shane brings because it brings a lot of energy and it brings the fan experience as well. Shane, in my opinion, has been extremely good for the sport. We've seen the ratings go up, at least for Xfinity, from the Australian and New Zealand viewership. I've seen it from my analytics, especially from every time SVG gets a win or every time I post an SVG video here on this channel, my viewership goes up because there's a lot of interest from Australian fans. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit, where I think a lot of Americans could be watching a certain Australian race here at the end of the year. It's very interesting to look at for sure. I love the celebration he brings to the table. I think it's a really good thing to look at and pretty cool to see the viewership we've been seeing in Teaks. And I love the celebration that Shane Van Gisbergen brings to NASCAR. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the NBC broadcast lineup, as their lineup has been officially confirmed for the 2024 season. Now, initially in the broadcast booth, it had Rick Allen, Steve Letarte, Jeff Burton, and Brad Daugherty. However, there was an error, according to Kelly Crandall, showing that for this year, the booth is going to be like the old school booth they had with Rick Allen, Steve Letarte, and Jeff Burton. Obviously, Dale Jr. is no longer there because Dale Jr., of course, is going to Amazon TNT starting in 2025, and Dale Jr. is no longer going to be there this year. On pit road is going to be Marty Snyder, Dave Burns, Kimmy Kuhn, and I believe at times other people will be part of that as well. For the studio analyst, it's going to be Brad Doherty and Dale Jarrett, and Marty Snyder will also be doing hosting the beginning of the events as well. I would love to see Brad Doherty commentate some Cup Series races because I think Brad Doherty brings a lot of energy to the booth whenever he's in the broadcast booth. I think he does an excellent and a really, really good job. But I'm not surprised to see he's not in the broadcast booth, though I think that one race he called in 2021 in Xfinity, Texas was an excellent broadcast he was able to do. And obviously, a lot of people are asking, what about Lee Diffie? Because there's obviously rumors that Lee Diffie is going to be calling some Cup Series races at the end of the year. Remember, that won't be starting until after the Olympic break, which is about 4 or 5 weeks from now. Then Rick Allen is going to be calling all the Xfinity Series races, and then, of course, at the end of the year, all the people that do the broadcast for Xfinity will be moving over to CW for the final 8 races, but all the people that do the NBC broadcast, except Lee Diffie, are going to be going over and doing that starting at the end of this year. I think it's a very solid broadcast lineup for sure. I think Steve Letarte and Jeff Burton have gotten better, and I think Rick Allen's gotten better, but I feel like it's not going to be as good as it's been previous years. But trust me, I'm looking more forward to NBC being back than hearing Fox, because Fox's coverage was not that good this year. I'm more looking forward to this, and trust me, I would listen to this broadcast any given day than over what we've got at Fox right now, because Fox has not been very good overall, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race at Sonoma Raceway, you saw the situation out between Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch. On the last lap of the race, Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch are battling for 5th position going into turn number 4 or 5. And Ross Chastain completely sent it into the corner and unfortunately took out Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch was justifiably not very happy, but he never confronted Ross. He spoke to Bob Cox and multiple reporters after the race and basically said that his race was ruined by Ross Chastain. Now, before Kyle Busch made these comments, however, Ross Chastain explained his side by basically saying he missed a corner and Kyle Busch braked, and he also was not very happy with Chase Elliott about what he did to him, which I don't think Chase Elliott did was very egregious compared to what Ross Chastain did to Kyle Busch. Now, like I said, Ross took some responsibility for the incident and wreck. If you watch the replay of what happened here, Ross Chastain completely just missed a corner and made a big mistake. And I think he should at least admit, and which I think he did, like I said, I think he did admit that he completely missed the corner. He said Kyle Busch braked, which he never braked. Kyle Busch didn't run out of gas. I know some Ross Chastain fans were suggesting that Kyle Busch ran out of gas, but Kyle Busch did not run out of gas till coming to the checkered flag. It was Ross Chastain getting to him that lost a ton of positions, which some people were saying that Kyle Busch should have lost a lot more positions than he ended up missing. And I think at least Ross Chastain, because he's been less aggressive, though he's still aggressive, he's not really been in any feuds over the last year or so. But I think Ross Chastain is really trying to get wins at this point and get as many points as possible, which I can't really blame the guy. It's a really, really difficult sport, and it's really difficult to get points at this point. So I get Ross Chastain explaining side. I'm glad at least hear what Ross had to say. But when I look at the incident in wreck, right, I think that Ross Chastain 100% is more at fault for the wreck and incident than Kyle Busch is. Because Ross Chastain is the one who got into Kyle Busch. And Kyle Busch, I also feel bad for in a sense, because it's been a frustrating last couple of weeks. And Kyle's really just trying to turn the corner. But like I mentioned and said, he's had a lot, he's basically gotten into some wrecks. He's made some mistakes on his own. But he was having a great race at Sonoma and got turned by Ross Chastain. I can't blame him. And I'm glad that Ross tried to defend himself. But at the same time, I do think that Ross Chastain is more at fault for the wreck than Kyle Busch, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Fox Sports TV ratings for 2024. As there was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that Fox Sports averaged 3.369 million viewers for the Cup races in 2024. That is up 1% from 2023, marking the first time that Fox has finished with an increase in a NASCAR season after having a delayed or postponed Daytona 500. That is absolutely huge. Obviously, this year, the Daytona 500 was postponed to Monday, and there's also a couple of races that had rain issues. Obviously, of course, the Coke 600, which is a big rating wins usually for NASCAR, or NASCAR on Fox. That, unfortunately, was down this year as well compared to last year. It was down about 100 to 200,000 viewers, obviously, with Kyle Larson not being there, with him doing the double. Less people were inclined to tune into that. Meanwhile, the Indy 500 ratings were up. And obviously, seeing the increase also a couple big factors. One, I think interest is up from some really great racing for the most part, a lot of events this year. But also the other reason is because Chase Elliott didn't miss a ton of races. And I think the broadcast, well, at least on the booth side of things, were a lot better. But I don't think the broadcast itself were absolutely that great. But I think this is a huge win for NASCAR and NASCAR on Fox, despite all the negative losses they've had recently. I think that this is still a really big win for Fox as a whole to see the ratings at least up this year. I'm really glad to see this. I'm glad to see the ratings are up for this year for 2024, and I hope that NBC can translate to that as well, because they need the ratings to be higher, because remember, we're going to be having more cable races in 2025, which are going to drop the ratings in a big way, because cable, we know, is dying. But have we seen the FS1 ratings up this year, and we've also seen the Fox ratings go up a little bit as well. Had the Daytona 500 started on time, I think these ratings could have absolutely been even more higher than they ended up being. Nonetheless, it's really, really awesome and great to see. And I'm very happy to see that at least this year, the Fox Sports ratings were up. I think Sonoma had 2.8 million this year. I think Sports Media Right was commented on Cindy Yen's post, which is really, really good to see. And nonetheless, glad to see that at least for this year, the Fox Sports TV ratings were up. Really awesome and glad to see overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about new tracks. Now, Bob Pockrass put out a post talking about what drivers would love to see on the NASCAR schedule, what new tracks they would love to see. Now, Chase Elliott has been a big proponent of wanting the National Fairgrounds on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. He's been a big proponent of this since all the way back in 2021 because he loved to see races closer to the city. Ryan Blaney and multiple other drivers want to see Chicagoland back on the NASCAR schedule. I saw William Byron in the article say he wants to bring Montreal back, and Tyler Reddick even has suggested Denver. Now, one big thing that Bob Pockrass noted in this article is that the schedule will be coming sometime in late June. Originally, the NASCAR schedule was supposed to be released last month, but due to delays going on with negotiations between which of the international races we're going to get, because there's a lot of talk that we are going to have an international race in 2025, there's really a bidding war going on between Montreal and Mexico City. Originally, which Mexico City, by the way, is winning that bidding war at the moment, but Montreal is really pushing to get a Cup Series race as well. They came very close to hosting a race this year, but with F1 moving the Canadian Grand Prix a little bit earlier this year, that's why Iowa Speedway was chosen. Now, Iowa Speedway, speaking of that track, that racetrack is expected to be on the schedule of 2025. Same with Worldwide Technology Raceway. But going back to talk about what tracks I'd love to see on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule, I would love to see Montreal. I think Montreal would be a really great market to go to. There's a lot of Canadian fans, and I think the racing would absolutely be really good at Montreal. The Xfinity Series all put on an excellent and fantastic product every year we went there, and I think it'd be a really great track for the Cup Series to go to. I know I'd said earlier about road course racing not being great, but I think Montreal would be the exception. I think the racing would be very, very good there. I also want to see Chicagoland back on the NASCAR Cup schedule, and I don't know if it's going to happen this year. There were rumors, speculation, it could happen this year, but I don't think it's going to happen in 2025. I think the earliest we will get a race on Chicagoland, once again, won't probably be at least for a few more years, at least 2026 at the earliest, but I think the next-gen car would do exceptional, because it's very similar to Kansas, and I think the racing in Kansas has been absolutely great. And I think that there's a good chance we go to Bowman Gray this year. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the rest schedule and what ends up getting released. But we are expecting the schedule, like I said, to be released in the not-so-distant future. So we'll find out more when the schedule does get officially released. But like I mentioned and said, we're not too far, I think, from the schedule being released for 2025, and it's going to be exciting to see what gets added. There's likely going to be Bowman Gray. We could go back to Daytona, but it likely we'll see some new tracks on the schedule next year and some familiar tracks potentially coming back next year. I want to see some new tracks still on the schedule in 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stage 60. As Stage 60 and RFK Racing put out a tweet indicating that they're teasing some more plans for 2024 on what their next race could end up being. And they showed Cam Waters and AUK US on the back of that car. Now, obviously, we've seen Stage 60 in 2 races so far this year. They ran the Daytona 500 with David Reagan, which I think they ended up finishing in the top 20, if I'm not mistaken. I think they led laps with David Reagan as well. They also ran this past weekend with Cam Waters at Sonoma Raceway, but unfortunately that race did not go so well. They got caught up in the big pinball in the bowling incident with Josh Berry, and they got a lot of damage and ended up finishing 31st, which is a shame because Cam Waters was moving through the field and was getting this car figured out really quickly. Now, Gragson indicated they're planning to run more races with this car throughout the year. I think the next race for this car most likely is going to be at the Chicago Street Course, and I think Cam Waters is going to come back. Cam Waters, obviously, of course, focused on Supercars. Will be back in that series in 2025 on a full-time basis, but I think that Cam Waters could be the driver. If not him, who else could they choose? Ty Majeski? Ty Majeski could race at a track like New Hampshire, perhaps. I think Ty Majeski was rumored at one point to be going to seat. What about someone like a Haley Deegan or like a Matt DiBenedetto, perhaps? Those could be certainly options. What about Cole Custer, Riley Herbst? Those could be options for the seat as well. But I think that they're going to run the seat of car a few more races this year. I think Cam Waters most likely at Chicago Street Course will be in the next race. We know there's some other supercar guys that are interested in coming in. I'd love to see like a Chaz Mostert coming over and run this series, or Brock Feeney come over from Supercars. I think that would be excellent and really, really cool. Nonetheless, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, and we'll see what happens in regards to this in the not-so-distant future on who gets to drive Stage 60, but I think most likely it will be Cam Waters in the seat, which I think will be very interesting and cool to see overall. To be honest, I kind of want to see more supercar guys come over and run, and I hope we do get to see more guys run in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Briscoe. As Chase Briscoe was speaking to media members yesterday about 2025. He told multiple reporters, including Jonathan Fell from the Racing Experts, that he's begun to reach out to teams for 2025 and other people that he associates with as well. It also is noted by Jonathan Fell from the Racing Experts that Mahindra and multiple other sponsors, including High Point, sound like they are going to be committed to wherever Chase Briscoe is going to go in 2025. This is really, really good to see because Mahindra has, of course, been an SHR sponsor since 2022. And Mahindra, of course, been doing a lot of commercials with Chase Briscoe. A lot of people thought that that was just a Tony Stewart sponsor, but it's really good to see that Mahindra is going to be committed to wherever Chase Briscoe goes in 2025. Now, Chase Briscoe has been rumored for a few seats going into 2025, but he also notes in this as well that he was not able to start reaching out to teams until Tony announced about 2 or 3 weeks ago that SHR was going to be shutting down. It's kind of crazy that in the contract, he was not allowed to go and talk to other organizations, despite the fact he didn't even know what his future was going to be looking like. Now, where could Chase Briscoe end up in 2025? Like I mentioned a second ago, there are a few teams that he could end up going to in the 2025 season. One of those organizations is Joe Gibbs Racing. We don't know what the future for Mark Truex Jr. is going to look like, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, but Mark Truex Jr. could end up retiring at the end of this year. Bob Pockers and multiple people have mentioned recently that Chase Briscoe's name has been kind of linked, and also Kevin Harvick as well said this on his podcast, that Chase Briscoe's name has been linked and mentioned as a possibility to replace Mark Truex Jr. next year. But I think Ford is really committed. So I think there's a few options in the Ford camp. One of those is Front Row Motorsports. We know Front Row is going to be expanding to a 3-car operation in 2025. We know Todd Gillen is committed. He signed a multi-year extension recently with the team. But I don't know if he's going to be announced to Front Row because I think that will either go to Josh Berry or Cole Custer, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. You've also got, of course, RFK if they decide to expand, but Brad has stated recently they need around $25 to $30 million if they're going to expand, and of course, we don't know where the charter negotiations are going to go, which we'll talk about near the end of the episode. I think the most likely option for Chase Briscoe going into 2025 is going to be the Wood brothers. He's been linked to that 21 car for the last few months, and let's be real and honest, Harrison Burton has been struggling immensely this year. I know it's the next-gen era, but the previous drivers like Matt Benedetto and Ryan Blaney and Paul Menard, let's be honest, did a lot better than Harrison Burton has done. Harrison Burton, in over 100, nearly 100 starts, has only scored 5 or 6 top 10 finishes, while Matt Benedetto and Ryan Blaney and Paul Menard all have better statistics. Matt Benedetto almost had more runner-up finishes in that 21 car than Harrison Burton's had top 10s. And as much as I like Harrison Burton, I think he's not a bad guy. I think he just doesn't deserve the seat personally. He's not done enough, in my opinion, to get the seat, and I think he shouldn't get the seat next year. I think Chase Briscoe will get that car to the playoffs more than likely, and I think he'll do a much better job in that seat than Harrison Burton has been able to accomplish. So I think most likely Chase Briscoe is going over there next year, and it makes a lot of sense with Mahindra and High Point because they're not going to need sponsorship if he goes there. If not, I think Front Row or Joe Gibbs will be the other option, but I think Chase Briscoe most likely is going to end up over at the Wood Brothers next year, and I know people are going to say that car sucks, but I think if Ford is as committed as I think they could end up being, I think Chase Briscoe will do a lot of great things over there, and I think he probably will end up most likely at that organization in 2025, but we'll have to wait and see what happens to where he ends up going in 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, I believe it was Speed Cafe and Supercars put out a tweet talking about the possibility of a certain NASCAR Cup Series driver running a supercar race. According to SpeedCafe.com and Supercar.com, Kyle Busch's name has been linked to running a supercar race at Adelaide this December. We talked about this on the channel last year near the end of 2023 going into 2024, but Kyle Busch has been rumored to be going over and running a supercar race with the organization. Originally, we all thought it was going to be with Erebus Racing, which of course has a big association with Richard Childress Racing. However, recently it was reported by SpeedCafe.com that AAA Engineering might be the organization that Kyle Busch ends up going to. AAA Engineering, of course, has drivers like Will Brown. I also believe Brock Feeney is part of that organization as well. And that organization, of course, is leading the championship currently with Will Brown, who currently has 9 or 10 career supercar victories. And obviously, Will Brown did drive for the 33 car for RCR. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of falling going on Erebus Racing, so AAA would make a lot more sense. And, of course, they have the connections with Red Bull as well. Obviously, I would think Kyle Busch would do very well in supercars because the next-gen car races very similar to supercars, and we've been seeing such a huge movement from supercar drivers coming over to NASCAR. Obviously, SVG, who's currently running full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, making select Cup starts, and most likely will be full-time in Cup next year. We've seen Will Brown make a start now and could make another start later this year as they're trying to figure out the next racer Will Brown to run. Cam Waters wants to run more races, and we've seen Brody Kosecki come over as well. I think we're going to see more supercar guys coming over to NASCAR, but I don't want just it to be Kyle Busch coming over and running. I would love to see drivers like Kyle Larson come over and run. I would love to see Bubba Wallace at one point maybe go over and run. Chase Elliott come over and run. I would love to see more NASCAR Cup guys go over and run supercars because we've seen supercars promote their drivers a lot. I think NASCAR would do a lot of promotion for it as well. To me, though, it'd be really cool to see Kyle Busch run it and run because I think he'd be extremely competitive because AAA Engineering is a very competitive team and organization. So I hope this really, truly happens. I really hope we do get to see Kyle Busch run with AAA Engineering and not Erebus because of all the fault that's been going out over there. I really think AAA Engineering will be a really great team and organization to pick up Kyle Busch. And again, I want to see this happen. I want to see more crossover, like Kyle Larson running the Indy 500, like other drivers going and doing really cool things, like IndyCar drivers going over and running this weekend in Le Mans. I would love to see more drivers do the crossover because I think it's really good for motorsports across the board, and it just grows motorsports as a whole. We saw ratings for the Indy 500 when Kyle Larson ran that. We also saw almost 6 million people tune in the Indy 500 this year. So I think it's really cool that we might see some drivers going over and running, and I really, truly hope it ends up happening where this happens for supercars as a whole, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about charter negotiations. Now, if you've been paying attention over the course of the last couple years, NASCAR is currently in charter negotiations with the teams. And recently, charter negotiations have not been going very well. There was a report that came out from ESPN by Ryan McGee, and one of the big things is talking about permanent charters. Until this article come out, we had not heard what Jim Francis' thoughts are, and he basically is one of the big proponents on not adding permanent charters. Now, why does Jim Francis not want to add permanent charters? We know why. According to what Jim France says, he says that they can't offer permanent charters to the teams, and they're mandating the teams to get involved with the new charter agreement because they don't feel like they'll be supported themselves from the media networks. I kind of get where Jim France is coming from a little bit, but it really doesn't make any sense. Because, yeah, obviously, this with everything else. NASCAR has a much different business model than other sports. Basically, all the other sports have a commissioner that works with the teams, like the NBA, the MLB, the NFL, among other things. They do that. NASCAR does not have that. They're not working for it. According to the new agreement, which let's now get Denny Hamlin's comments actually first. Denny Hamlin says that permanent charters won't cost a thing in a tweet that he quoted for Jim France, which I don't fully agree with Denny Hamlin. It's going to cost NASCAR leverage, and it's going to cost them control. NASCAR wants as much power as possible. Now, according to the new proposals come out, which the teams have said is the worst offer they've received at this point, it sounds like that they rolled back on a lot of things they originally were going to agree on. And there's two big key things that came out from this article. Number one, they're looking to add a budget cap and a cost cap. Now, that was not determined how much they're going to give the teams, and I wonder if it will just be per car or will be for the whole entire organization, because if it's per car, that's going to give advantage to teams like Hendrick and Gibbs, because if it's like $20 million per car, they're not going to put all that into those cars. They're going to put that in the whole organizations as a whole. The other big thing, and this is one area I completely disagree with, is the France family being able to buy into a charter. I don't know why the France family wants to buy a charter at this point. They have full control of NASCAR, IMSA, ARCA. Why do they want to get involved in buying a charter? It really doesn't make any sense. And I know people say, they have an IndyCar. Roger Penske owns a team in IndyCar, so it will work a lot for us. That's a conflict of interest. That's why I don't agree with this, because that is a complete conflict of interest. We've seen a debacle with Penske recently with the whole push to pass situation. It is a complete conflict of interest. So I don't really agree with that. It also continues from an Associated Press article, according to Jenna Fryer. The teams don't want to start their own league, and NASCAR move on without the likes of Hendrick, Gibbs, and Penske if they decided to boycott if the charter agreement didn't go through. Now, the teams like Hendrick, Gibbs, and Penske, and 23XI Racing, they want to get an agreement done, but they're frustrated with the way things are going. According to what Jenna Fryer reports, they want 45% of the new TV revenue that's going to be coming in. Currently, the teams get 25%. NASCAR says it's 35% if you factor in what they pay out every single race. But they want to pay that 35%. They want to go up to the 45%. And basically it would mean the tracks get 45%, the teams get 45%, and NASCAR would get 10%. They also want 33% of new revenue, which comes from the gambling side of things. The other thing they want, like I mentioned, is more control of the sport in permanent charters. NASCAR has been basically running with an iron fist for 76 years. They don't want to give up any control of the sport, which is why they're trying to get more power than they currently have at this moment. It continues on, and this is where things get very interesting, however. The teams are very worried that some smaller teams are really looking to take the offer that NASCAR currently has. Tony Stewart, according to what Ryan McGee reported, was really shocked to see that Front Row basically went in and bought a charter. So it sounds like you have some teams that are basically trying to break away, and we could start seeing some breakaway from the RTA. So you have NASCAR going up against the teams, while you have some teams going up against other teams. You have teams like Hendrick, Gibbs, 23XI Racing, and Penske, who basically are wanting more control. While you have teams like Front Row, Trackhouse, and RFK, who probably are looking at wanting to get this deal done. And if you have that happening, NASCAR's plan is working. Now, here's my side of the situation, how I feel about this. I think both sides are being unreasonable in a sense. Now, I will say NASCAR is being a little more unreasonable here because of them wanting them basically to buy into a charter. I don't agree with them wanting to get a charter. That does not make any sense because of the conflict of interest situation. It's going to be a complete conflict of interest if they get involved with buying a charter. But I also think the teams are being a little reasonable in a sense, but I also think that they're not wanting to boycott. And if these teams don't get a charter agreement done, it could hurt. And again, only one or two teams, it sounds like, has to sign an offer, and I think eventually the teams are going to cave in. I do think we are reaching a boiling point, but at the same token, same time, I'm still not 1,000% worried, but I'm the most concerned I have definitely been in a very long time when it comes to these charter negotiations. I do think a charter agreement will get done, and I think eventually there will be some sort of compromise that not everybody's going to love and not everybody's going to be happy with. I do think, like I said, though, we will come to a point where teams are going to have no choice but to agree with what NASCAR wants for the sport to succeed. And it puts us fans in a bad position because I think some people are going with the teams and some people are going with NASCAR. And I've seen a lot of people saying we should just abolish the charter agreement as it is. You can't abolish the charter agreement. You can't do that. So I get why people want to abolish it, don't get me wrong. But at the same token, same time, you cannot abolish the charter agreement, and you cannot abolish charters, especially with how much they have become in recent years. We're going to have to follow this story as time goes on, but charter negotiations are not going well at the moment, and teams are very unhappy where charter agreements are at, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR silly season once again. There's been a lot of talk around NASCAR silly season over the course of the last couple of days. Let's first go to PRN. According to Lee Spencer and Daniel Trotta, Martin Truex Jr. will be making a decision here relatively soon in regards to his future. And they're thinking that Martin Truex Jr. could retire at the end of this year. Also, Brett Griffin and people on Door Bumper Clear also reported on this as well, that it does sound like that Martin Truex Jr.'s decision could be coming by the time we get to Nashville week. Many are beginning to speculate that Martin Truex Jr. could retire at the end of this year. Now, Martin Truex Jr., obviously, it's been a year-by-year basis over the course of the last few years. But Joe Gibbs Racing is wanting Martin Truex Jr. to be making a decision on his future because every single year he kind of does this where he waits till the last minute. And even Kevin Harvick stated that he wants Martin to make a decision so he can celebrate his career, which I completely agree. Martin Truex Jr. is one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR Cup Series history. 34 career wins, has won a lot of races, a Cup Series champion, and has been a late bloomer in his career and has still got a shot to win the championship this year. I know Martin has stated he wanted to wait till September, but Joe Gibbs, like I said, is really pushing for an answer currently at the moment. So who could be the replacement for Martin Truex Jr. if he ends up retiring? One name that some have suggested is Kyle Busch. Now, according to Lee Spencer, Kyle Busch has an option year with Rich Choice Racing. He signed a 2-year deal with RCR with an option year for 2025. Option year does not 100% guarantee that Kyle Busch will stay around for 2025. However, I think it sounds like that this is not going to be happening where Kyle Busch can go back to Joe Gibbs Racing, and here is why. There's a few big factors. One, it was reported by Adam Stern last night that Kyle Busch is opening up a Chevy dealership. So I don't think Kyle Busch is going back to Joe Gibbs Racing. It would have definitely been really cool to see Kyle Busch go back and get some unfinished business complete where he can go back there and succeed. However, let's be real and honest here. That really ended with a lot of bad blood. And as much as I think a lot of Kyle Busch fans want to see Kyle Busch really happy, because let's be real and honest, the last year or so Kyle Busch has been struggling with Richard Choice Racing. I think it's more of the cars than anything else, because I think Kyle Busch is still an excellent and a really great driver. I get he's unhappy, but I don't think he'd be very happy over at JGR. Plus, they've got a lot of drivers coming up through the ranks currently at the moment in the lower series. You've got Chandler Smith, who's rumored to be going over there potentially. He's been a driver that a lot of people think can replace Martin Truex Jr. Chandler Smith's been doing a really good job in the Xfinity Series this year, despite struggling a little bit recently. He's been doing an excellent and great job. And then you also have Corey Heim, but Corey Heim is heavily linked to be going over to 2311 next year. Or so we think he's linked over there, but I think he could end up going over to 2311. And then Eric Almirola's name has been mentioned. But I think Kyle Busch likes working at RCR, and I hope they can really turn the corner. But I definitely think the honeymoon phase is wearing off. But I don't think Kyle Busch is going back to Joe Gibbs Racing. I don't think he'll be going back there. I think he wants to be focused on trying to help RCR get better. Plus, there's no development going over there. But going back to Martin Truex Jr., who could take over the 19 car? I've already mentioned Chase Briscoe, but Chase Briscoe more than likely is going to go ahead and go over the Wood brothers. I've seen people mention Noah Gragson. We'll talk about where I think he's going to go. But I've even seen Eric Jones mentioned as a possibility, which Eric Jones back at JGR would definitely be very interesting. But I think most likely it's going to be Chandler Smith who goes into the 19th seat if Mark Truex Jr. decides to go ahead and retire. I think that's what ends up happening. Speaking of 23XI Racing, I already mentioned that Corey Heim more than likely could go over to 23XI, or so we thought. We know Tyler Reddick has got a long-term deal, and Bubba Wallace, despite not signing the extension yet, is expected to sign a multi-year contract extension with 23XI Racing. According to Lee Spencer, Riley Herbst's name has been linked to 23XI Racing. This surprised me, considering Riley Herbst has been with Ford for a very long time. But remember, Riley Herbst started as a Joe Gibbs development driver, and that was because of the terrible Herbst in Monster sponsorship. If 23XI Racing is looking to expand because they're expected to get one of the charters from Stewart-Haas Racing, they could get Riley Herbst because, of course, he did come from SHR. But personally, if I had to choose between Corey Heim and Riley Herbst, no disrespect to Riley, I'm going to absolutely go with Corey Heim. Corey Heim's been tearing it up in the NASCAR Truck Series with 4 wins this year, is nearly in the points lead at this point, and he's going to make a start with them at Nashville in a couple of weeks. So I think while Riley Herbst, he bring the sponsorship to the table, I think that Corey Heim or Chandler Smith or even Carl Evans, who want to come out of retirement, I don't think it's going to happen, or Kurt Busch, will be better options than those guys. So I don't think Riley Herbst is going to go to 23XI, but he could go there because of the sponsorship. Let's transition over to Trackhouse Racing. Most likely, Shane Van Gisbergen is getting the 3rd seat. With him having 2 wins this year, I think he gets it over Zane Smith. As much as I like Zane Smith, I think he goes to College Racing next year. I think Shane's going to be a full-time Cup guy. He's got the sponsorship with him. Red Bull's committed with him as well. I think SVG is going to end up over there. Let's finally talk about Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson, I mentioned, could be a possibility for the 19. However, door bumper clear, and we've heard there's some multiple other reports as well. We've heard that Noah Gragson has been linked to a 3rd RCR car, with the most likely being Austin Dillon signing a multi-year extension with RCR and Kyle Busch staying at RCR next year in 2025. We think Noah Gragson could be a frontrunner for a 3rd car, but it all depends on what Mark Truex Jr. does, because Bass Pro is committed to Mark Truex Jr., but Bass Pro also likes Noah Gragson very, very well, and there's a lot of teams looking at him. I had heard the Trackhouse at one point was looking at him, but they're not going to pick him up, obviously. And we've heard the front row could be an option for Noah Gragson as well. But a lot of people are looking at a 3rd RCR car. Now, some are going to say, why would they expand with their struggles? Well, they're that team that's rumored to be picking up that 4th charter. And I think that Noah Gragson would do really well at RCR. I know Kyle Busch and Noah Gragson have worked together in the past. I think they work together very well. I know KBM didn't go as well over there, but I think they would work together a lot better. And Noah Gragson would be able to get the best out of equipment. He's been doing an excellent job over at SHR this year. Since leaving Legacy, he's really improved, and he's become a really solid free agent. He's one of the most sought-out free agents currently at the moment. And I think Noah Gragson would be an excellent driver to pick up in a team and organization. It would make a lot of sense to go after Noah Gragson because of how excellent he's been this year. And the Bass Pro commitment would be huge. So I think Noah Gragson more than likely is going to end up next year over at RCR. I think front row is an option too, but most likely I think with the Bass Pro sponsorship and connection, Noah Gragson will likely end up over at that team in 2025, but that is just my opinion. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news story. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Links goes below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Do you think Kyle Busch will ever leave RCR this year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And do you think Noah Gragson is going to RCR? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, I'll have the NASCAR Xfinity Series Race 6 video for this weekend at Iowa. Then tomorrow we'll have Cup Series Race 6 from Iowa. And if any major news breaks throughout the next couple weeks, we'll talk about it here on the channel. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.